Okay, hey there. So pretty excited about this particular presentation because this is a field of study that I have been researching for a while, and I really think it's going to be very, very helpful, and we're going to learn so much more in the future. And you may notice, I don't know if you pay any attention to credentials, but I added a new certification because I just took a course on functional genomics and talks about all the different genes and their variants that we know of so far, and real life nutrition and coaching tips to help people deal with gene variants. So let's dive in here. Really quick refresher on genes and genetics, because we could spend an hour on this alone. Genes are sections of our DNA, and they basically provide instructions to tell our cells what to do. A little bit of chronology here. The Human Genome Project was launched in 1990, and it ended in 2003. Its goal was to map the human genome, and they did end up mapping about 90% of the human genome. They identified around 20,000 genes. At that point in time, they were at the limit of what technology would do, but as technology improved, they completed mapping the human genome in 2022. So you'll notice that's only like 3 years ago. So this is very new science. We learn stuff every day about genes and about what areas they relate to and how they function and that kind of stuff. So very, very new, very, very changing. A single gene may actually have variations in how it is expressed. So think of it like variations of a gene are like different font styles for a letter. So if you're typing, you can type the letter A, you can type it in different sizes, you can type it in different fonts, you can type it in different colors. Those are all very normal, very valid versions of the letter A, but some of them are going to function better with respect to certain purposes or environments. So a mutation in a gene is an actual change in structure or sequence. It's physical. So it's a change in the DNA. And then what we call an allele or polymorphism is just a different version of the gene that changes the way it's expressed, so it alters those instructions to the cell. Again, a very normal thing to happen to a gene. Those variations and mutations can be either inherited or acquired, and an acquired variation just means that it occurs to us during our lifetime, and it can happen based on lots of different things. Exposure to chemicals, toxins, viruses. It can be caused by a nutrient excess or deficiency. It can be caused by certain lifestyle behaviors. Even stress can cause a gene to have a variation. Also, a variation can cause either a loss of function, a gain of function, or no change at all. So just because a gene has a variation and it's not expressing itself the way it expresses itself maybe 90% of the time doesn't mean that it's going to cause bad things to happen. And currently, we are studying genes from a lot of different perspectives. I'm not going to go into all of them. Here's a few of the main ones. So genetics is the basic study of genes. It looks at heredity and looks at variation in inherited characteristics. Then epigenetics is the study of changes in gene behavior caused by factors outside the cell. And notice that says changes in gene behavior, not changes in gene structure. So these are things that just cause the gene to act differently. They don't actually change it physically. And then genomics, which is kind of what we're going to talk about, is the study of an individual's genes. That's including their unique combination of inherited and acquired characteristics. So all the variations that that individual has in their genes. So let's talk about that individuality. Again, I said each individual has a unique genome. Think about that. That makes it kind of crazy, right? That genome is made up of my genes and my environmental factors. Nobody else's. So this kind of explains a lot of the variability that we see between like disease risk factors and disease reality. So an example would be, why would one person who smokes their entire life never get lung cancer? Because we know that smoking is like the #1 cause of lung cancer, right? While another person who has never smoked a day in their life gets lung cancer, right? So genes kind of explain that, and variations in the interaction, that individual's genome controls that. So our current knowledge of gene variations and how they can be influenced by nutrition and lifestyle, as well as now the availability of DNA sequencing and testing to consumers, allows us to really help people make choices that will optimize their health and wellness. Genes and their variations impact biological processes in several functional areas that really significantly impact our health, such as gut health, nutrient bioavailability and metabolism, detoxification, our stress response, activity, like the intensity and frequency for exercise and activity, sleep, and then DNA repair. Also keep in mind that genes often affect multiple functions. They don't just deal with one specific function. They usually coordinate with other genes, so that not a single gene is responsible for anything. And also remember that our individual genomic analysis helps us identify tendencies, things that may happen. It does not represent destiny. It does not represent a medical diagnosis. It just gives us clues to what might be influencing certain health factors so that we can then try to incorporate things into our life that will mitigate those risks. In many cases, we can actually alter our nutrition or our lifestyle behaviors. We can reduce risk, and we may even be able to resolve health issues related to a particular gene variant. Pretty exciting stuff. So that first area of a functional area that genes have an effect on is gut health. And we know we need a healthy gut. It significantly affects our overall health. It also means that we'll have a healthy immune system, because 80% of our immune system's in our gut. Gut health factors that are affected by specific genes and variants include the tone and tightness of our gut tissue, the mucus layer, our inflammatory response, which is part of that immune response, our ability to break down histamine, our ability to break down and use short-chain fatty acids, which is fuel for beneficial bacteria, and then also the diversity of our microbiome. So here are some examples of how gene variants might relate to a gut health issue. Leaky gut, which is intestinal permeability, is a very common factor. Most people with autoimmune disorders have leaky gut. We also know that inability to break down and eliminate histamine is a common factor in chronic allergies. And then we also know, like we said, that a lack of diversity in the bacteria in our gut is linked to a weaker immune system. All of these things are affected by gene variants, so they can directly affect our health. And here's a specific example of a single gene variation and then how we might address it. So this is a gene variant that might cause a health issue, and we can actually help resolve that health issue. So CLDN1 or Claudin1 is a gene that provides the instructions for producing the protein Claudin1, and that protein actually helps to tighten the junctions of the gut. So a low function variant of that gene will increase gut permeability. That may or may not cause health issues by itself, but it might. And then there are certain dietary protocols that we can alter. Look at certain gut healing nutrients and herbs that will actually help strengthen that intestinal barrier and maybe overcome the low function variant of that gene. So that's kind of a real world example. In the nutrients category, we have genes that affect how we can break down macronutrients and metabolize them. So that's our protein, our fat, and our carbohydrates. And what we've learned with different gene variants here is that certain individuals may function better on, say, a higher fat diet or a lower fat diet or a lower carb diet, whatever the case may be. We may also need to avoid specific types of protein or carbohydrates depending on our gene variants. And then as far as micronutrients, which is our vitamins and minerals, genes also affect how we metabolize those, how we absorb them, how we transport them. So again, variants may cause certain individuals to need to get their nutrients from specific food sources, like they may need to get it from an animal versus a plant food source, or they may need it in a specific form, or they may just need to get it from a supplement. So again, genes kind of help to tell us if those issues are occurring. Genes also affect ability to digest other food components. Some examples here are the LCT variants in that gene that reduce the production of lactase, and lactase is the enzyme that we have to break down lactose, which is the sugar in dairy. So that relates to lactose intolerance. And then we also know the two genes, HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8, have variants, and if both of those variants are present, then it may promote an immune response to gluten, may result in celiac disease. Again, not destiny, not determined, but possibilities or tendencies. And genes also affect those hormone signals for hunger and satiety. This is really important for anyone who is out there trying to lose weight, feels like they're doing everything right, and it's just not working. So you might consider that you have certain gene variants that are affecting your signaling. There are variants that will negatively influence signals, so that can cause increased appetite, reduced feelings of fullness. It can initiate cravings for like energy-dense foods, which are typically more higher calorie foods. This increases the risk for obesity. So individuals that may have gene variants affecting these things can benefit from certain things like meals that have higher protein content, more consistent protein where your protein's divided evenly during the day, a structured timing of meals, maybe even more frequent meals or more meals during the day, and then also regular resistance training has been shown to help people with these gene variants. All right, in detoxification, that is the processes that break down metabolic compounds and toxins so that they can be removed. So we don't want those nasties roaming around in the body. And this includes chemicals and toxins we may be exposed to in our environment. It also includes metabolic waste products, like from our normal daily biological processes. Detoxification actually has two phases. Phase 1 converts compounds so they're more water soluble, and then phase 2 takes the metabolites from those and processes them further so that they can be removed from the cells and eliminated from the body. And both of these phases use a lot of different enzymes and chemical processes, which are all controlled by genes. We've found that mammals have 18 families of cytochrome P450 genes, or CYP genes, and those are the genes that are most heavily involved in detoxification. And here are some examples of health issues that might occur due to variants in some of those genes. So one thing is that we can't clear excess hormones out of our body. So the circulating levels of hormones become out of balance. And you might see this in hypothyroid or hyperthyroid conditions, even insulin sensitivity, things like that. So that's a place where excess hormones aren't getting removed as they should be. And then certain medications, most medications, and then their metabolites after we've metabolized them and the compounds are out there, those don't get removed. So that can cause toxic buildup, and it can cause sensitivity to the medications. This this one and the next one, medications that are metabolized in flesh too quickly, kind of gets to the root of why certain people react to certain medications a certain way. Somebody can take a medication that works great for them, somebody else takes it and it doesn't do anything for them. And then also stimulant compounds like caffeine might be metabolized too slowly, causing overstimulation, and that can cause physical and emotional things to go on, health issues to go on. Okay, next is stress response. So stress can be an external factor, such as a social or environmental factor, or an internal factor like illness or injury, something psychological or emotional, and then the oxidative stress or metabolic stress that happens just from our biological processes. But it's a factor that provokes a physical and or mental reaction. And we know from our studies that chronic stress negatively affects our health. It reduces digestive function, it suppresses our immune system, and it increases inflammation. So stress is bad, chronic stress is bad. And we have found many different genes that affect both our physical and mental stress response. Some examples are that genes regulate hormone and neurotransmitter production and transport. They also regulate the function and volume of receptors for those hormones and neurotransmitters. They affect our ability to clear excess levels of neurotransmitters, and they also affect neuroplasticity levels, and that is the signaling that's directly between the brain and the gut. So another specific example, just one of many, of a gene variation that regulates stress response and how we might address it. The ADRA2B gene is actually a deletion variant, meaning that the gene is missing. It's associated with enhanced emotional memory and increased amygdala reactivity. So people with this gene variant, which means the gene really isn't there, have these enhanced emotional memory and increased amygdala reactivities. These persons kind of tend to hold on to emotional experiences longer, or they may feel a conflict or criticism more strongly than someone else. So it's a real thing there. But we can look at dietary protocols. We can alter them to include like calming and or adaptogenic foods and herbs. And then we can also incorporate lifestyle practices so that we minimize overstimulation and help these people learn kind of emotional processing tools. So again, gene variant, not destiny, just a tendency, and we have control over how we can deal with that and resolve it. Physical activity. We really need to be moving on a regular basis. What we found is that being sedentary has the same negative impact on our health as smoking. That's kind of crazy, scary. And physical activity may include a lot of different things. It's movement, but it also has different intensity levels. Also includes things like stretching, flexibility exercises, and strength training. Our genes can kind of identify the best types and intensities of exercise and movement for us. We have genes that regulate the cardiovascular adaptation to exercise. We have genes that affect our muscle fiber composition and our tendency to grow muscle. And we have genes that influence how we respond to protein, as well as carbohydrates and lipids, and how we use them for fuel, how efficiently the body uses them for energy versus heat. So those are all going to affect the type and mode of activity that we can successfully do on a regular basis. So again, specific example, one gene out of many, the MSTN or myostatin gene regulates muscle growth. There are certain variants in that gene that may allow for increased muscle development, while there are others that may be associated with a reduced capacity to build muscle. So what we can do is we can look at dietary protocols and our strength training regimens. We could alter those to provide the best support for an individual's genomic profile and their goals. Sleep. Getting adequate quality and quantity of sleep each day is critical to optimal health. I really can't read that as many times as I need to. Sleep is so critical. Those circadian rhythms influence our mood, our mitochondria function, metabolic repair, our detoxification timing and efficiency, and regulate hormone levels. So we know that sleep deprivation causes endocrine dysregulation. So we can see thyroid hormones, growth hormones, cortisol, ghrelin, which is one of the appetite hormones, all get out of whack, suppresses our immune function. We see impaired glucose management and insulin resistance. When we're sleep deprived, it's just really, really bad. So here are some areas where genes are involved directly in the sleep process as well as indirectly. They regulate circadian cycles and timing. That includes hormone production and signaling. They regulate the conversion of tryptophan, which is a protein amino acid, into serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, which is a melatonin precursor, which is the cue for sleep. They also control melatonin signaling and receptor function. These last few are kind of surprising. I hadn't thought about them, but genes influence skin sensitivity. That's our sensitivity to textures, as well as temperature regulation. So if you're one of these people that cannot sleep in a certain type of sheet, a certain fabric, that's okay. Your genes are doing that to you. If you sleep hot or you sleep cold, again, genes are controlling that. They also influence light, sound, and scent sensitivity. So light cues are pretty important for circadian rhythm. Some people are a lot more in tune to sounds or more disturbed by sounds as they sleep. The same thing with scents. So it's kind of interesting to think about these things as they affect our sleep. But one of the things that I found interesting that we found out is there are over 100 genes involved just in olfactory sensitivity or scent. So there can be a lot of different genotypes out there. And here's some specific examples of gene variation in sleep, how it might be addressed. There are clock genes and PER genes, so PER 1, 2, and 3 actually, and they set circadian cues as well as our sleep chronotype. And yes, there are sleep chronotypes. That's things like a morning type, which we call a lark, an evening type, which we call an owl, or an intermediate type, which we call a hummingbird. And those chronotypes are pretty important because you're trying to force, if you're a night owl and you're trying to force yourself to go to bed at like 9 o'clock every night, that's probably not going to work. So we can use the genetic knowledge of our genes and gene variants to alter our schedules, kind of help align them with our optimum times for focus and energy. We can alter our wake and sleep times. We can alter our meal times and even our meal content. And then we can also incorporate lifestyle practices to help us keep our circadian rhythms better aligned so that we can improve our sleep and ultimately improve our health. Then this last section is on DNA processes and repair. So our cells are constantly going through processes that involve using and changing DNA. They replicate to reproduce, and when they do, they're making a copy, and they make a copy of the DNA inside the cell for the new cell. Those transcription and translation processes are involved in accessing the DNA, the genes, separating them out, reading the instructions, executing the instructions, and then methylation pathways are basically chemical reactions that change DNA, again, helping to perform all of those daily biological functions. Well, as you can imagine, we have trillions of cells, and this is happening over and over and over, constantly in our bodies, so errors are going to occur. That's okay, because we have genes that identify errors in DNA and go repair the mistakes. However, if we have variants in those DNA repair genes, that can reduce our ability to use certain cofactors for processes or to perform certain processes. Methylation is one of those. It's pretty important. So here are two examples of DNA repair genes. The MTRR converts homocysteine to methionine. It affects the ability to regenerate B12 coenzymes for those healthy methylation processes in DNA repair. So if we have a variant that's compromising that function, that can reduce our ability to repair DNA or to methylate well. Then the BRCA1 and 2 genes actually are DNA repair genes. They produce specific proteins that are needed to repair DNA whenever both strands of the helix are broken. So again, mutations in these genes reduce our ability to repair DNA errors. Again, not destiny, not determined, not a medical diagnosis, a tendency that once we know about we can try to do things for our nutrition and our lifestyle to mitigate the risk. So when we have variants in DNA repair genes, it allows errors in DNA to proliferate. It increases the risk for chronic disease and cancer. But again, our knowledge of those variants allows us to change nutrition protocols and lifestyle behaviors to better support those processes and lower that risk. So the last topic in this particular presentation is direct-to-consumer DNA testing. And that is one of the things that has made this so exciting is anybody can go out there and get a DNA test. And then it's a matter of interpreting the results, understanding those gene variants, and then figuring out what to do about them. So there's a lot of different companies that offer DNA testing, and they have varying levels of health information and reporting that they'll provide. They're not too expensive. Usually the cost of the test and at least some reports will range between $100 and $200. It can get more expensive depending on the company and what they're providing. Some examples, 23andMe and sequencing.com actually provide DNA testing with basic health information, and then they have deeper health reports that can be purchased. And I know 23andMe just went through a little bit of controversy where they filed for bankruptcy, but they've been purchased by a charitable organization that is committed to carrying out the research and making DNA tests available to consumers. So personally, I still trust 23andMe. That's where I got my DNA test done. So Self-Decode is another company. They offer their own DNA test. They analyze the genetic variants. And again, they offer purchase of individual or bundled health reports with that DNA testing information. NBX Wellness, DNA Life, and Designs for Health are companies that utilize more of a practitioner arrangement. So a practitioner gets trained on their specific test and their reports, and then that practitioner can offer DNA tests and read the health reports and personalize supplements and things to their clients. So that's they put a different layer in between the consumer and the company. Living DNA provides DNA testing, mostly focused on ethnicity and origin, but they do have some health information, such as vitamin response, food metabolism, and endurance response. Dante Labs offers DNA testing. They do whole genome sequencing. Again, they offer individual or bundled health reports for purchase. Nebula Genomics provides DNA tests. They provide their reports through different various membership levels that are annual memberships. And then Metabolic Healing, also their reporting arm is called TrueReport. They use the raw data file from 23andMe, and they produce a very comprehensive genomic profile report. The important thing is, if you do a DNA test like this, you may or may not get detailed health reports. If you don't, then you want to grab your data file and give it to another company who's going to give you a detailed report. Then you also need to make sure that you understand what the report is telling you. That's where you want to work with somebody who's trained, who can interpret those results, and then can actually offer appropriate nutrition and lifestyle coaching recommendations to help you meet your health goals. So whatever those are, if you find that certain gene variants may be affecting it, then you've got specific plans rather than just general information that you don't know what to do with. To recap, genetics is a new and constantly changing science. We learn more and more every day. Everybody has a unique genome. We know that genes and their variants can significantly affect our health in a lot of areas: our gut health, detoxification, the way we metabolize nutrients, stress, sleep, activity. But if we know our genetic profile, we can use that information to improve our health. We can implement certain nutrition protocols and lifestyle practices. And I would like to include my contact information here. There's my email address. There's my cell number if you want to text me or call me. I'm obviously trained and certified in interpreting genomic information, and if this is an area of health that you would love to explore, and you would like to just discuss it with me, I'd be happy to do that. So let me know. Thank you very much again for listening to my stuff, and you guys have a great day.